Hey guys, welcome back. This is Professor Hank, and in this video I am going to talk to you about the C++ for loop. So let's go ahead and get started, right? So it's a few things that I want to go through with you, a few high-level introductory kind of stuff or kind of things. One is that the for loop, it's a repetition structure, which means that you use this thing to repeat a statement or block of statements a certain number of times. Okay, and that certain number of times could be, whatever you set it to be. So you might have it repeat 1 times, 2 times, 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, whatever. So instead of typing out 10 lines of code, 20 lines of code, you just take one line and then wrap it up into this loop. And repeat that statement as many times as you need. So the for loop is repetition structure, and it is highly customizable. Okay, we're going to see that it has 4 different parts that go into the thing that makes it logically equivalent to a while loop, right? So we're going to have a test expression, we're going to need to have an update expression, we're going to need an initialization expression, and then we're going to have our block of code that is going to be repeated a certain number of times, right? So we've got those 4 pieces, and we can use any combination of those pieces. And those expressions can be as simple or as complex as you need them to be, right? And one other thing I want to point out is that a for loop is a pre-test loop. Okay, so what that means is that the test expression is going to be checked before you enter the body of the loop, right? So before any statements are executed at all that are attached to that loop, you're going to check your test expression first. So what this means is that the loop could repeat 0 or more times. Okay, if that test expression evaluates to false, when you're encountering that loop, well, then the body of the loop isn't going to execute at all. Okay, so let me go ahead and show you a little bit of the logic of this. I'm going to draw you a little flow chart here, and just to give you a feel for it. Okay, so you've got, let's go ahead and get a pen here. Okay, so you've got, you're starting off, right? And your program is doing its thing, and then you're going to come across this for loop, okay? And there is a test expression. Okay, and we're going to have some kind of a variable that we're going to use as part of this test expression. So maybe you call it I or something like that, right? So you might say something like, well, so long as I is less than 5. Is that true? Okay, so if it's true, then we're going to go over and we're going to do something. Okay, this is the body of the loop. So we might print out, hi to the screen or something, right? We're just going to have a simple example here, okay? Let's not get too complicated. So you'll print hi, and then once you've done that, okay, then we need to make sure that this I variable gets incremented, right? Or gets updated, because that's our control variable, right? And without that, right, so I equals I plus 1 maybe. Without that, you'd end up having an infinite loop. You have to have some kind of code that is going to cause this test expression to eventually evaluate to false, because without it, again, you're going to have an infinite loop, and you'll just be stuck in that loop, and we'd just be printing hi until the power goes out, right? So you go back and you check your test expression again, okay? And as soon as it is false, well, then you continue on, you break out of the loop, and you continue on with the rest of your program, okay? Doing whatever it is that your program needs to do. So you've got your test expression, it's pre-test, right? Because this thing could evaluate to false, right? So let's say that I was 10 when you first encountered the test expression. Well, then this would be false. Then you would just bypass the body of the loop, right? Now, I forgot one little piece here. That is that we have to initialize our I, right? So you might set I equal to 0. Okay, so this is kind of the logic of it. And so it's a loop because, look, it looks like a loop, right? You're going round and round. so long as this test expression is true. So there's 4 parts, as I was saying, to the for loop, right? You've got part 1, which is your initialization expression. So you initialize some counter variable. In this case, it's going to be I. Then you've got your test expression, right, where so long as this test expression evaluates the true, you enter into the body of the loop. Okay, and then this is right here. This is the body, right? Whatever is behind this test expression, that is the body of your loop. Okay, and it can be one statement or a block of statements. Okay, and if it's a block, you got to put it inside of these curly braces. Okay, and then you have part 4, which is the update piece, right? Probably should have written update down here, right? Be consistent. So update. So there's 4 parts of this loop, right? So you've got your initialization part, you've got your test expression, you've got the body of your loop, right? And you've also got your update part, okay? So we've got the update part. Now the update part always automatically happens at the end, after the body of the loop. This is different from the while loop, in that in a while loop, the update part, you put it anywhere you want inside the body. Now we're going to see here that the syntax for this, okay, it looks like this. We've got the keyword for, and then we've got these parentheses, okay? And inside the parentheses, there's 3 parts, and they're separated by semicolons, okay? So this first part, that's the initialization part. That goes right there. Your test expression is the second part, and that goes right there, okay? Now the update expression goes right there, okay? And then the body is right here, okay? Now the body could be, like I said, one statement or a block of statements. I'll write in opening and closing curly braces to represent a block. Now within that block, you can have, you know, even just one statement if you wanted to. You could have 1 or more statements. Right? Now if you leave the curly braces out, then you can only have 1 statement. Okay? Alright, so let's go ahead and look at some code. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and build this thing. Now remember that you know, there were 4 parts, right? You've got your initialization part, you've got your test, you've got your body of the loop, and you've got your update part, right? So those 4 pieces. So in the diagram I drew for you, right, we had a loop that was basically just going to be, you know, printing hi on the screen 5 times, right? So let's just go ahead and write the code for that, and then we'll just, you know, I'll just do whatever I can think of off the top of my head just to show you a couple different ways for this thing to work, okay? So we got our for keyword, right? And you have to place inside of parentheses your initialization expression, your test expression, and your update. So I'll just start off with something that's pretty standard, right? So you can define what the data type is, and you can specify the variable name, okay? And then you initialize it with some value. So start it off with 0. Okay, so I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to have my test expression, and it's going to be I less than 5, because again, that's what we had in my flowchart, right? And then you have your update expression. So here, anything that, you know, basically is an expression that you could have somewhere else. Right, now they're not little statements that go inside of here, they're expressions. And so I plus plus would work, I equals I plus 1 would work, I plus equals 1 would work. I mean, you can do I plus equals 3. You've got all kinds of different options. So you could just use the increment operator if you want to also. And in this case, in this context, the prefix version or the postfix version doesn't matter. Because remember that the order in which these pieces are going to execute is going to be the initialization expression, and that's only going to happen once, okay? Then it's going to be test, then it's going to be the body of the loop, and then it's going to be update, right? So you start off with init, that's number one, but once you have gotten past that step, okay, then you're going to have your loop just continuously go from, you start off with init, then you do test, body, update, and then you just loop back, test, body, update, test, body, update, test, body, update, test, body, update. Okay, so I've got my init done, I got my test done, and I got my update part done. Now, in the example I was setting up, all I did was put hi on the screen. So let's put hi on the screen, and I'll put it on separate lines so that way it doesn't all just run on one line. Okay, so let's go ahead and run it. And so you're going to see that 5 is going to appear on the screen, or excuse me, hi is going to appear on the screen 5 times. Okay, now if I was to set this down to 2, well then it's only going to appear on the screen twice, right? So you can see hi, hi. Now why, right? Let's trace through it and understand, what's happening. Okay, so initially I get set to 0. Right? So that's the first part. And then you do, that's the init, and then you do your test. Well, is 0 less than 2? True. So then you enter the body of the loop, prints out hi on the screen, and then the update expression happens. So we add 1 to I, so I becomes 1. Right? Now the initialization expression gets skipped when we come back around, because remember, we go back to test. So then we look at I less than 2. Well, is I less than 2? Well, yeah, because why? What's inside of I? Right now, 1 is inside of I. So that's true. So we enter the body of the loop. We're going to print our second hi out. And then after that's done, plus plus hi executes, and I becomes 2. And then we go and continue with the loop. Go back to the test expression. So in the test expression, we check, is I less than 2? No, because I is equal to 2 at that point. So it's false. And then the loop's over, and we continue on with our day, right? So I'll go ahead and put a goodbye after the loop, right? So this is happening after the loop, right? And we'll put a C out below up here, okay? And this is happening before the loop, okay? So before the loop hello, and then we get to our loop, and that's going to repeat hi twice, and then we'll see goodbye afterwards. Right? So there you can see hello, hi, hi, goodbye. Now, if I made this I less than or equal to 2, right? Well, when I is equal to 2, this test expression isn't false anymore, right? So when it's less than or equal to 2, it would be true, which would give us another repetition, another iteration. So you can see now there's 3 highs. Why? Because when I is equal to 0, right, then that means that 0 is less than or equal to 2, that's 1 high, and then I goes up to 1, is 1 less than or equal to 2, yes, that's 2 highs, and then I becomes 2. Then we go back to the test expression, is 2 less than or equal to 2, yes, so there's your 3rd high. Okay, so that's one way you can do it. Now, I said that you could do a statement or block of statements, right? So we can put a block that immediately follows this little header portion of the for loop. And when you do that, we still just have the one statement here in this example. So you can see it's kind of optional whether you want to put that one statement inside a block or not. But if you want to have multiple statements that are controlled by this loop, then you have to have this block. So maybe I do something like this. Maybe I want to say cout hi by, right? And I want both of these statements to be part of this for loop. Well, then I have to put it in a block, and then that block immediately follows the for loop. Right? So now you can see that it says hi by, right? Because both those statements were repeated, right? For every repetition of the loop. Okay, so here's something else that we can do. The variable I here, its scope, when you say int I equals 0 with the expression in here, its scope is the block of this loop. So we can use it, right? And you can see how I is going to change as the loop progresses, right? It's going to go from 0 through 2, right? So 0, 1, 2. Why? Because 2 is less or equal to 2. That's true, so we enter the body of the loop, and so we see that 2 again. Now, what would happen if I set that to just less than again? Well, now you only see the 0 or the 1. Why? Because as soon as I has 2 in it, well, 2 is not less than 2, right? That's false. So the body of the loop is not going to execute that time, right? It only executes so long as this is true. Which reminds me, the for loop, as I was saying in the intro, is a pretest loop, which means that it's going to repeat or iterate 0 or more times. If this is false, when you run the loop the first time, you're not entering the body of the loop. You're not going to see anything. So if I initialize I to 5, it's kind of silly, but if I do, then 5 is not less than 2. This is false, and so the body of this loop is never going to execute. Okay, so you can see, all we saw was the hello and the goodbye. The loop never executed, right? We never entered the body of the loop. Okay, now you'll notice also that this isn't going to compile. Okay, this is an error. Why? Because when you do int I within the parentheses here, the scope is the for loop itself where it's defined. That's it, right? So it doesn't exist. The I here is out of scope. Okay, if you wanted to have access to the content of that I variable after the for loop, then you kind of have to do this int I thing before the for loop itself, right? So I can do something like this. Okay, so int I for I equals 5, I less than 2, and let me go back and put the cout I after the loop. Okay, because what's going to happen is that you create the I, and now the scope for I starts on line 11 and goes through the rest of the program. So you're going to see 5 now because we set I to 5 in the line 12 here, and then the body of the loop got skipped, right, because 5 is not less than 2, and then we were able to cout I down on line 17. Okay, so I mean that's a way that you can access that variable. Maybe you need to change it for some reason. You want to be able to show the user, or you want to be able to use it after the loop is finished. You can do that, fine. Okay, let me see here. So a couple other things to show you. One is that the test expression can be as simple or complex as you need it to be. So let me create a couple of different variables here, x and y, and we'll set x equals to 0, and we'll set y equal to 0, right? And so in here I can say, well, so long as x is less than 5, or y is less than 26, right? So long as either of those is true, then the loop's going to continue iterating. It's going to continue repeating. So the test expression, you can make this however you want it. You can use whatever variables, whatever type of expression you come up with, so long as it evaluates to true or false. Okay, as long as it's true, you're going to enter the body of that loop. So I might do something like this. I might say something like cout x and y. I don't know. I'm just making up silly examples just so you get the feel for it, right? Now, I don't have a test expression, or excuse me, I don't have an update expression as part of my for loop. You'll notice that Visual Studio is not complaining. All three of these pieces, right, the init part, the test part, and the update part, they're all optional. You can leave them out. Now, in this case, it's kind of a bad thing because I just created for myself an infinite loop. So you can see it's going to go forever, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Okay, you don't want that. You always have to make sure that you've got an update that causes your loop to break out. Okay, so maybe I just do something like this where I just say x plus plus. X is getting updated by 1 each time, but then I can also do something with y, right? So maybe I'll do y plus equals 3, okay? And so let's just see how that progresses, okay? So long as either of these are true, then the loop continues repeating, right? So it started off at 0, 0, the x incremented by 1 each time, you can see with the x plus plus there, and then y went up by 3 each time. Now the loop stopped as soon as x was equal to or greater than 5 and y was greater than or equal to 26, right? So you can see that the last pair of numbers was 8 and 24, because 24 was less than 26. That was true, which made the entire thing true, which enabled us to enter the body of the loop, even though even though x was 8, it causes x less than 5 to be false. Doesn't matter, because this is an or, right? And, I could change this to an and then that would change the way this behaves. Okay, and so now you can see, we only see 4 and 12, because as soon as x was 5, well, then that caused our test expression here to evaluate to false, and so then it was over, right? So you can do that. Like I said, flexible. Whatever you need this loop to do, you can make it do, and it's logically equivalent in all ways to or it can be made logically equivalent in all ways to a while loop. Okay, so you could even make a for loop that looks like this. Okay, so this is kind of weird because there's no initialization expression, test expression, update expression in there. But it's legal syntax, right? So this is an infinite loop on purpose. And so you could do something like this, right? You could create your x before the for loop. And so we could then print out our high, and then I could put the update expression afterwards, and I could even put inside of the body of the loop, I could say something like, if x is greater than or equal to, maybe I'll just say if x is equal to 5, right? Then I'll say break. Okay, now with break, what this does is it immediately terminates the loop, right? So what I've just done here is this is another way. It's kind of annoying, right? In that, or funny that you can write this 1,000 different ways, and that's one of the things that makes, I think, learning C++ so difficult, is the fact that for anything you can do in the language, there's like 10 other ways you can do it. That's one of the great things about C++ is that it is so expressive. You can come up with many different solutions to solve a particular problem, but that's also one of the real pains in C++ is that there's all kinds of different ways that you can do things, and so it's hard to learn all of them. But anyway, so this is just another way of writing for int I equals x, I less than 5, I plus plus, right? I used x here, but you get the idea. It's just an alternative way of doing that, right? So let's go ahead and run it, and you're going to see that the high appears on the screen 5 times. Okay, so yeah, I mean, you can completely leave these things out, or you can just mix and match, right? So long as x is less than 5, right? So you have complete flexibility in how you write these loops, okay? Very powerful, but also can be very confusing, especially when you're learning the for loop for the first time. All right, so let me show you one more thing here, and that is the continue statement, right? So let's go ahead and make a for loop that's going to repeat 5 times, okay? And what we'll do is we'll skip one of those repetitions. So inside the body of my for loop, I'll say, well, if I is equal to 2, then what we'll do is we'll continue, okay? Otherwise, we'll print out I, okay? So here's what happens. Okay, when I is equal to 2, and at some point it will be equal to 2, right? It's going to start off at 0, and then it's going to increment by 1 each time because of the update expression. As soon as I is equal to 2, though, this is going to evaluate to true, and that's going to cause continue to execute. And so when that happens, what continue does is continue says, end this repetition right now, end this iteration right now. Repetition and iteration, they kind of mean the same thing, kind of synonyms. And so what will happen is that that repetition terminates right now. So any code that follows the continue is skipped. It's done. It's not going to be executed. And you'll go back up and you'll start the very next iteration of the loop. So what you're going to see here is you're going to see that the 2 gets skipped. Okay, so you see how it's 0, 1, 3, 4. That's because when I was 0, no problem, because 0 is not equal to 2, so the continue got skipped and we did the C out I, right? But as soon as I was equal to 2, then that was true, continue happened, and then the rest of the loop never executed, right? We ended that repetition right then and there, and we've started the next repetition. Okay, so that's what continue can do for you, and break can get you out of the loop altogether, right? So if I was to make that break instead, right, you'll see that we only saw the 0 and the 1 because as soon as I was equal to 2, we'll then break, loop over, right? So continue terminates the repetition right now, and break terminates the entire loop right now. So continues for the repetition and for the current repetition, the current iteration, and break is for the whole ball of wax. Okay, for the whole loop ends. Okay, and let's see, is there anything else I want to show you here? Yeah, I mean, you can nest loops too, so I think I'll do that as well. Okay, so let's say that I wanted to print out a single star, right, on the screen. Okay, if I wanted to print a single star on the screen, well, then I could just do C out star, right? And you'd see just one star. Let me get rid of that hello and goodbye. Maybe I'll just delete all of this and start over to clean it up. Okay, if you want to print out a star on the screen, there you go, right? One star. Okay, it's useful to design loops from the inside out. So what I could do is I could say, well, now I want to print out 5 of them, right? All in a row. Well, you could do this. Well, that's gross, right? You don't repeat yourself. Fundamental software engineering principle. Instead, I'll put that inside of a loop. Right? So now this C out statement is going to repeat 5 times. Right? So there's 5 stars because it repeated 5 times. Now if I want 10 stars, well, I'll just change that to 10. Right? Now what if I wanted to repeat all of that even more, right? Let's say that I wanted to print out 10 lines, okay, of 10 stars. Well, let's just repeat what I just did, right? So the first thing I did was I printed out 1 star, right? And then I said, well, let's repeat 10 stars. Well, let's now repeat that 10 times, right? So let's wrap that entire thing inside of a loop. Okay, and I got to use different variables here because they're going to be all in the same scope, right? So j and I. If I just defined I here, then I'd be redefining I within the second for loop, and we might, it'd be confusing. Okay, so j is for the outer loop. This is an example of, I think it's just outer, of nested loops, right? And this is my inner loop. Okay. So now this for loop right here is the inner loop, and it makes up the body of my outer loop. Okay. Now what we're going to see is one long line of stars, right, which looks kind of gross. And you're thinking, well, why? Didn't you say you wanted to do 10 lines of 10 stars? Yeah, I do. The reason why it's all on one giant long line is because there's no code here to make the cursor jump to the next line. So you might be thinking, oh, well, what I'll do is I'll just do C out E and DL, right? Or maybe you'll say, well, I got to do E and DL here. Okay, fine, but not fine, because now we've got a giant column. Okay, you might be thinking, oh my God, what's going on? I don't even understand. Well, let's make this a little bit easier to read. In this case, it would be very good to use those curly braces to make blocks, okay, to break stuff up. So let's put some curly braces first, I guess I'll do it first around the, we'll just go back to our original loop, right? So if I put the curly braces around here, right, it's easy to see that, well, that this C out star belongs to that one for loop, right? So there's the 10 stars. And so now I want to repeat this entire thing right here, right? I want to put that all inside of its own for loop, okay? So, and maybe I'll just do 5 repetitions. Instead of 10 by 10, we'll do like 5 by 10. Okay. So now you can see that this is the beginning, right? This begins the outer loop, and then this right here is the end of the outer loop. Okay, and then this opening curly brace right here, that's beginning the inner loop, and then this closing curly brace right here, this ends the outer loop. Okay, so let's go ahead and run it again just to make sure that I don't have any syntax errors, which I don't. Okay, let's see here. Oh, I do have a logic error though, because right, never actually executed, right? Remember, pre-test loop. So that outer loop, right, we came along to this outer loop, but what did I have J set to? 5. Is 5 less than 5? False. So the outer loop never repeated at all, so we just skipped by the entire thing, right? So let's fix that logic error and set this back to 0. Okay, and let's run it. Now we're back to our really long line again, right? It's smaller, again, because my outer loop I had repeat only 5 times, not 10 times for the, you know, I changed that up, okay, just so it would be a little bit smaller. Okay, but why is everything on the same line? Well, do you see any code here that's going to make the cursor jump to the next line? No. So you might be thinking, well, I'm just going to put an ENDL there, and that's going to print a star and then move the cursor to the next line. And that's exactly right. That's what it's going to do, and that's the problem, right? Because you're going to print the star and then move to the next line. Okay, so what do we want to do instead? Well, when this outer loop has an iteration, right, you enter the body of that outer loop, and so you're in there now. Who cares how you got there? All of the code that is inside that outer loop, it's going to execute. Right, so all 10 of these repetitions are going to happen. Boom, boom, boom. You can forget about the outer loop for a second. So what are you repeating now? Star, end line, star, end line, star, end line, star, end line, right? Star, move the cursor, star, move the cursor, star, move the cursor. You don't want to repeat that ENDL instruction for every single star, right? You only want to do it once all 10 of these stars are done. So this is the wrong place to put this, right? Once all of the stars that belong, you know, that you want to print out as controlled by this inner loop are done printing out, that's when, once that's finished, that's when you want to move the cursor to the next line. So we want 10 stars, 10 stars, 10 stars, 10 stars. So after the 10 stars are done printing, then move to the next line. Okay? So now we've got ourselves, each row represents one repetition of the outer loop. And then each column, each one of the stars in that row, represents a repetition of our inner loop. Okay, so that's why, you know, we ended up having one long old line or one long old column of lines. You got to make sure that you get everything in the right place. Okay, so let me go draw out that logic for you, and then we'll call it a day, because this video is running kind of long as it is. I just want to introduce you to the for loop, show you how you know, you can customize it, the basics of how it works, and you know, you can make those expressions. Remember that you can make those expressions in the loops anything you want. Right? If you wanted to count down, for example, you could say J minus minus. Right? It doesn't matter. Okay, so let's go. Let me diagram out that logic for that loop right there that I just did for you. Okay, just so you can kind of understand what was happening there. Okay, so my outer loop started, well, I guess you could say my inner loop. We'll build it from the inside out, right? So I've got this this statement. That's what I started off with, right? I said print a star. It was a C out star, right? So print a star. And then I wanted to repeat that, right? So what did I have to have? Well, I had a test expression, right, that said so long as I is less than 10. Okay? And then if that was true, okay, then we printed our star, and then we increased I by 1, right? Okay, and then we went back up and checked that test expression again. So this was our inner loop. Okay. Now we had to initialize I to 0 initially. Right. So that is my inner loop. Okay, now let's build the outer loop, and I'll use a different color for that. Okay, so for the outer loop, what did we have? Okay, well, there was a test expression for that outer loop too, right? Now remember, we said so long as I is less than 5, right? Then continue on to the inner loop. Okay, now we had to initialize, I feel like I want to make this just a little bit smaller. Let me zoom out a little bit. We had to initialize the I, right, to 0, just the one time. Okay. Now after the inner loop was done, right, once that finished, right, once this became false, okay, that means that that inner loop's finished and we're back to executing the outer loop again, right? So with the outer loop, what happened after the inner loop finished? Well, that's kind of a terrible parallelogram, isn't it? We moved the cursor to the next line, right? That's when the ENDL happened. Okay, and then this is if this was true, and then we would go back and update. This should be J, huh? Because we use J for the outer. Sorry about that. J. And then we updated J. Okay, and then we go back and we check our test expression. Okay, but as soon as J was not less than 5, well, then the whole thing was over. Okay, and we were done. Let's see, so we'll mark this red for end, and then we'll mark this red for start. So that was the logic of our loop, right? So you start off and J got set to 0, right? Well, is J less than 5? Yeah. So then we enter the body of our inner loop, right? So I is set to 0. Is I less than 10? Yeah. So then what? Print a star, right? Then set I plus plus. So I becomes 1. And then you go back up to this loop here. And is I less than 10? Yes. So enter the body of the inner loop, print star, right? I plus plus becomes 2. And then that's going to repeat, until this becomes 10. And then as soon as it becomes 10, is I less than 10? False. And so then we bust out of the inner loop, and then we're back to the outer loop. And so the outer loop would do ENDL, which would move the cursor to the next line, right? And then J++ happens. And then we go and check the test expression of the outer loop. Well, is J less than 5? Yes, 1's less than 5. And then we enter our inner loop, right? The body of the outer loop, but then we start our inner loop. So I equals 0, so this gets reset back to 0. And then, lather, rinse, repeat. Okay, so it's kind of funny because these nested loops, they're not that hard. I mean, they're easy to work with, but they're kind of hard to learn, right? Because if you take a look at what I drew up there, that's actually kind of complex. And where did the ENDL go? And this was a more simple example, right? I mean, if I was going to do something with computing averages or finding numbers or whatever, it can get really complicated. Right? Imagine if you had a classroom of 35 students and there was 3 tests each, and you wanted to tell each student what their average test score was, right? You'd have an outer loop that would move through every single student, and then your inner loop would calculate the average, ask the student, hey, what was score number 1? What was score number 2? What was score number 3? Then you'd have to add those numbers up, divide by 3, tell them their score, and then move on, right? So it can get really complicated really fast. But yeah, so that's an introduction to the for loop, and I showed you, the basics of it with a simple example, printing high. I showed you some of the scoping rules for the expressions. Remember, there's 4 parts. There's the test expression, there's the initialization expression, there's the update expression, there's the body of the loop. Showed you some of the flexibility of it, how you can write it in all kinds of different ways. And you're going to choose which way is the best. Well, that's going to be dictated by the problem that you're trying to solve, right? You always write code in response to a plan that you've come up with. You don't come up with a plan and after you've written your code, you write the code to tailor your plan, right, or to match your plan. Showed you, you can use a for loop with a statement or block of statements. Showed you how to use break and continue, and then gave you a brief example with the nested loops. Okay, so that's going to bring this video to a close. If you felt that the video was useful, please consider giving the video a thumbs up, and if you thought that the video sucked, well, then you've got that thumbs down button as an option as well. If you'd like to see more videos, if you're interested in more content from the channel, feel free to hit that subscribe button. And as usual, if you're a student of mine and you have further questions, feel free to drop me an email or to stop by my office hours. Okay, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.